Welcome to It's Bloody Complicated, the Compass podcast that brings you conversations from across the progressive movement. Every week we speak with writers, thinkers, politicians, journalists and public service workers about how we come out of these unprecedented times in much better shape than we went in, a good society after COVID-19. I'm Frances Foley, your host today and Deputy Director of Compass. Compass is a place where people come together to create the visions, alliances and actions to be the change we wish to see in the world. These conversations have live access for Compass members who can put their own questions directly to our guests. If you'd like to participate in a live call, go to www.action.compassonline.org.uk/podcast to join Compass today. Otherwise, sit back, grab your drink of choice and get ready to get complicated. Welcome everyone to this episode of It's Bloody Complicated. Joining us this week to discuss PR and how we get it is Kleine Jordan from Make Votes Matter, Nicole Haydock from Get PR Done, and Darren Hughes from the Electoral Reform Society. PR is a cornerstone campaign for Compass and an issue which we see as fundamental to the cause of progressive politics. We're interested tonight mainly in the how rather than the what or why of PR. And so the question is, how do we get it and when do we get it? The hashtag tonight is It's Complicated. So welcome everyone, Kleine, Darren and Nicole. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on the call tonight. So I'm going to ask each of you our opening gambit question, which is always, where are you and how are you? Kleine, do you want to go first?
Frances, lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm pretty well, thank you. Slightly frazzled after day of 3 other kind of big online events. So yeah, the adrenaline has been high, so I might suddenly collapse at the end of this. But it's all been very good, all towards getting proportional representation, of course. And I'm in Totnes, the hippie centre of the universe. So of course I've got a hippie kind of cloth in the background there, hiding a bed that's upended just to fit in. So that's me.
Very on brand. Nicole, how are you and where are you?
Oh, hi. I'm from Bury, north of Manchester. How am I? I'm worried about Farage at the moment.
Would you like to elaborate on that? Why particularly right
now?
Well,
I happened to stumble upon a YouTube of his yesterday, and he was encouraging people to go and stop these invaders from the channel. And I thought, oh, whoa, this is worse than Le Pen.
Concerning.
Yeah. So I'm a bit worried about that. But otherwise, I don't mind this lockdown too much because it doesn't really change that much in my life, really, apart from going to live meetings as opposed to Zoom ones. But, you know, it's actually quite an interesting new way of doing politics, I think.
Yeah, and it's really nice to have people from all across the country easily convened in the meeting on these Tuesday night calls. Darren, how about you? Whereabouts are you and how are you?
Well, hi there, and thanks to Compass. We're great long-time supporters of PR and never taking your eye off the ball for it. So thanks for organising tonight. Normally I'd be in Deptford, where I live in southeast London, but I decided to get out of the city for a few days and more rural climes to suit my my New Zealand background. So I'm not at home at the moment, but just not an invitation to burgle me. But I'm just trying to relax and sort of get out of the monotony really of lockdown. I think that's been one of the tough things. So no matter how happy you are with where you live, it's not normal to be there for months and months in a row. So I found that a bit hard, and obviously being so far away from my family down in New Zealand has been a tough old thing too. But however, we've just got to keep optimistic, and I guess that's one thing electoral reformers can never be accused of not being as optimistic.
Hope springs eternal or dies last, whichever way you want it. Yeah, that's great. And that's certainly what we'll be getting into a bit tonight, whether we see more opportunities in the current situation or fewer. I'm definitely going to be asking a lot of those questions, and members on the call can already start loading up their questions in the chat box. So do go ahead and do that. My first question is to all of you, actually. When did you all come to see electoral reform as fundamental to the work that you do and something you wanted to focus on? So with your different backgrounds, and especially with the number of different issues that we have, you know, as progressives to kind of look at and be interested in, why was electoral reform the one issue that you decided to devote your time and your energy and your wisdom to? How about you, Darren, first?
Great. Well, I guess for me it was in my teenage years, because in New Zealand there was a big debate about whether to move from first past the post, a system that had been inherited from colonial times, to a proportional system, and there was quite a long debate around that about about whether to do it, how to do it, what to go to, and it came off the back of some pretty tough reforms more generally. So there was more of a public mood for getting everything upside down, and we'd had elections where there'd been the wrong winner in terms of vote share versus who formed the government. Parties getting 20% of the vote, 2% of the seats. There was virtually no diversity. I mean, when my friend Helen Clark was first elected to Parliament, who went on to become Prime Minister and served in her government, the Parliament before that had only had 4 women. Indigenous people, the Māori people, were more or less contained to just 4 seats because of the way the boundaries were drawn for Indigenous representation. So there were a lot of issues there that kind of got people involved, and it was trying to get people to see that change could be possible. And I think from all those various perspectives, from being a campaigner through to being an elected politician, serving a government and serving an opposition, I could sort of see that it wasn't just about counting votes differently to turn them into seats. That's like crucial to this whole idea, but it was actually really also about the culture of politics changing. Over a quarter of a century, we've not had a single party majority government, and no one thinks of New Zealand as a basket case. In fact, quite often they look towards it, and in that respect, it's been capable of producing leaders like Jacinda Ardern, who I think, those mix of skills that you just need as somebody who can listen, compromise, get things done. Those are things that have just validated PR in my mind.
Mm. Yeah, maybe I'll follow up with you about a couple of questions about how that actually came about later on. But yeah, it's always fascinating to have those international case studies that we can look to, and which demonstrate a different way of doing politics as well as just the structural change that PR brings. Kleine, how about you? How did you come to start Makes Votes Matter?
Well, yeah, I come to democracy via campaigning for environmental causes, basically. I've been an environmental activist all of my life since I was a small child. I organised a sponsor silence for Friends of the Earth at the age of 7, so I've been passionate about that for a long time. And eventually got to the point, after having a career in corporate sustainability, or sustainable enterprise, not just big corporations, that it was really clear that you can't solve the climate crisis challenge without actually having real democracy. And my tipping point was 2015, with the most disproportionate election ever in the UK, when I just thought, this is ridiculous, as so many others did. And the Electoral Reform Society was putting out all sorts of fantastic stats and information about that. And a whole load of us, just with the anger and the determination that something needed to change, gathered online. So Make Votes Matter is basically a bunch of activists that grew out of that kind of upsurge in interest after that election. And it was a year later that we actually incorporated as an organisation, which is kind of necessary if you want to get any grant funding and things like that. But most of us who started it actually worked unpaid for a year or almost a year before we actually organised any funding. So we do this out of the love and the kind of the urgent need for change, more than anything else. And so we try to campaign at a bit of a sprint. So we've always got lots going on. So that's where I come from with it. Yeah.
That's great. It actually follows quite well into my follow-up question on that, Kleine, which is, so taking us right up to the current moment, can you give us a sense of MVM's current strategy on getting PR? Where are the pressure points, do you think? And how would it work in an ideal scenario, bearing in mind that with Marx's words ringing in my ears, it's not conditions of our own choosing, but how would you ideally see this working over the course of the next few months or years?
Yeah, sure. So Make Votes Matter basically has 3 strands to its campaign. There's the grassroots. We need to get as many people all over the country knowing about this, understanding it, and being active in demanding the change. And so we have local groups all over the country, and we recently had a National Day of Action, Demand Democracy Day, with thousands of people taking part, taking photos and videos of themselves in front of local landmarks, and saying that they demand democracy. So we had people writing slogans in beach sand. We had a few banner drops. One was off Westminster Bridge, so had the words "Make Votes Matter" 2 meters wide for each letter, and kind of coloured smoke bombs in the suffrage colours of green, purple and white. And so that there's a lot of creativity in all of that. The second strand is Labour, which is a key lever in terms of getting to actually change the system. You need one of the 2 big parties on board, basically, and the Tories aren't looking like they're going to do anything about fairer votes anytime soon. So we have a really big focus on Labour, and we've made huge progress. And all of our work is collaborative. That's very much kind of our instinct, is always collaboration. So very shortly, we're going to be launching Labour for a New Democracy with other organisations like the Electoral Reform Society and Compass, as you know, and the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform are very key in that as well. And so we believe that we can change the party policy. Like 76% of Labour members want PR to be party policy, and we've got 85 motions, I think, so far from constituency Labour parties, and lots of Labour MPs support as well. But there's clearly a lot more work to be done, but we believe it can be done and it needs to be done. So then the final strand is the Alliance, where we bring all of the organisations and parties and public figures and local group leaders together to work together to try and change the system. So we meet quarterly, and I think one of the biggest achievements that we've had to date was the Good Systems Agreement, which answers the other part of your question. So with electoral reform, you often end up in a systems debate about which is the best system, and people have different preferences because they have different values, and those values lead to different voting system choices. And so we thought it would be really helpful to agree on what is good enough, so that everybody can, in that kind of group, the Alliance, can say that if there's an opportunity to bring in one of the systems that is good enough, we will work together to do that. And so we condensed loads of information from previous national consultations, commissions, etc., on voting systems, so including looking at New Zealand and Wales and Scotland and so on, and actually tried to condense that down. So it's less than a 1 A4 page with 10 principles of what good voting systems look like. But we also say that the best way to choose it is not the politicians deciding, or us as a bunch of people who are really interested in it deciding, but for the people to decide it in a deliberative way, like through a citizens' assembly. So that's our kind of vision for how you choose the voting system, but I know others have different perspectives.
Cool. So the idea about that would be you convince enough of the progressive politicians who are going to form a government to bring in a bill pushing PR, but then that citizens decide what form that PR system would take?
Yeah, that could be a route. I mean, there's obviously various different routes bringing about the change could take. But we are very keen to avoid it going into a much bigger process. Like, I'm all for a constitutional convention, but if the voting system was just one part in that and wasn't ring-fenced and protected in some way, I would be concerned that other things from that constitutional convention could go ahead and the PR bit could get kicked into the long grass. So for me, it would need to have a specific remit around that included.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for joining us again. Sorry that you had some technical difficulties. So to come back to the question that I was going to ask you, Nicole, is this question about your background and how you came to see PR as fundamental. So why did you choose to focus on PR in terms of your activism and your energy, and devote a substantial amount of time to campaigning for it? Why do you see it as so fundamental to your politics?
Well, fundamentally, a number of us were absolutely gutted by the election results, and many of us in the group are actually been experienced kind of lefties, if you like. And we thought, what on earth has happened, and how can we make sure that the Tories never get in again, basically, because the majority of people in this country are not Conservative, as proved by the number of votes of people who voted not for the Conservatives. 16 million people did not vote for them, 14 million did. So we thought, right, PR is the only solution to make sure that we have a democratic system in this country, and that we have a government which represents the majority. Reflecting on this terrible results, fourth defeat in a row, losing by 80 MPs, how the hell do you get back from that? And for us, the obvious answer was PR. But the main question is, does the Labour Party understand it? We're not sure they do yet.
And what's been your main sort of focus of the work of Get PR Done? What's your approach to
Well, I mean, we've only got off the ground in February. The lockdown started in 15th of March, so that didn't leave us much chance to do very much. But in that very short window, we actually managed to get, because we realised that the hustings for the Labour Party elections were happening, and there were a lot of meetings planned in the northeast and the northwest. And since that's where we're based, we decided to lobby every single hustings that we could possibly lobby, and we did. And in a matter of basically a couple of months, if that, we approached about 3,000 to 4,000 Labour Party activists who flocked to these hustings. And obviously we tried to approach the candidates, which was quite an interesting little exercise. I'll tell you more about it maybe later.
Great. And so speaking about the current context as well, I wanted to ask you, Darren, so ERS has long carried the flag for electoral reform. Do you see more opportunities in the current circumstances or fewer? And, reflecting on also the past few years, does PR feel more or less within reach than, say, maybe 5 years ago? Or how do you see the present lie of the land and the opportunities and potential risks of campaigning for PR in the current circumstance?
I think it's important to be quite upfront about the fact that it's a really difficult thing to land. I mean, I'm so glad we're talking about what we're trying to do rather than deluging people with figures and stats. I think the case as a logical argument stacks up really strongly. But the difficulty is that this is about the distribution of power. And for any other reform of society or the economy, you get an interest group, campaigners, people who are interested in the area, and they persuade politicians to change someone else's industry. But in this example, we're going to the politicians themselves and saying, change your own industry. So we're always kind of in this difficult environment, because we are not setting the political weather. We're responding to it because the vested interests who want to keep things the same control so many aspects of the debate. And it's politicians are about the only group of people in society who get to regulate their own environment and their own industry. So there's a real power question in there, I think. In a way, 5 years on, I think we're in a better spot than we were 5 years ago from when Kleiner was mentioning after that 2015 election, because it was a single party majority government. It was before the Brexit polarisation, which has disrupted party allegiances and made people more open to shifting ground, which might be some more opportunities for us as well. And I think that it also the referendum process was such a disruptive event that I do think that in the context of Westminster issues, it has put it at the bottom of the list of people's preferred method of making changes, which is where I think the work we can do to build up the credibility of deliberative democracy as part of a manifesto process is just so important. So I think there are plenty of signs of light there to focus on and for us to get in behind. I think where we would see opportunities is in this continuing campaign of trying to persuade Labour to change its mind. I think Keir Starmer has impressed so far as somebody who is got his eye calmly on the ball quite a few years ahead of people on Twitter who have their eye on the next 1 or 2 hours. And I kind of admire that. I think, sitting a sort of a pace there. And as part of the leadership hustings, he did promise to consult party members. So I think there is a body of work for those of us who want to see this happen to really be involved in that and to try and get there. And we had quite a significant win if you're an electoral reformer. I appreciate that it might not have been front page news outside of our orbit, but getting the Labour Party internally to shift to using STV voting for electing their NEC constituency reps was just such an important thing, because we came up against two of the things we always do. People who say they support us, but at the last minute don't for tactical reasons. And secondly, getting people used to using these systems to demystify the whole thing. And I think that was such an important moment. So there's a bit of wind in our sails from that. Just quickly on the Conservatives, I think there are some opportunities actually. The Conservatives now represent parts of England that they haven't ever before. And I think that does open up some doors towards using STV in England for local government, just as it's used in Northern Ireland and in Scotland, and the option of it now in Wales. And then in the nations, I think there's so many fantastic democratic innovations happening in Wales and Scotland that actually stand on their own merit. But as the issue of the union becomes more and more central, its very existence, actually seeing that if Westminster stays so stuck in the mud, then actually that acts as an issue to drive the UK further apart politically. So I think those are areas there. And I should also mention that the trade unions, we've been doing some work in that space for quite a few years now, because I think that's going to be an important part, as well as the work with members, conferences, CLPs, on and on. So it's all these areas have to be kind of moving the whole time. But I certainly don't sit here, despite the 80-seat majority for a party explicitly opposed to PR. I still think there are things we can get on with and make a real sense of forward momentum with.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point about pacing as well, right? Because thinking through any strategy, we do want to think about when to pile on pressure, when to sprint, when to go for the longer haul, when to sit tight, when to step in and intervene in the political discourse to make the case. And I think that's what all campaigning organisations who are doing this need to sort of weigh up and be judicious about and spot those opportunities to make the case. And that's something that Make Votes Matter have been spending quite a lot of time thinking about. So I wanted to ask you, Kleiner, as well, how do you see this balance between maybe a push from the outside, i.e. loud, kind of noisy, sometimes a little bit antagonistic campaigns, which can help show up political parties, embarrass them sometimes, make them feel morally obligated to commit to PR and show up that they're not doing their job if they don't, when they say that they're democratic, against the sort of more softly approach of working within parties, trying to persuade, one MP or one CLP at a time. How do you as an organisation see that balance of power? Where do you see that you put most of your energies or efforts?
Make Votes Matter has always taken a very friendly approach, kind of trying to make as much noise and create as much pressure as possible, but always being very friendly. I mean, yes, you need to challenge those in power. And so I'm sure some of you have seen on our social media, some people might read some of our tweets as not being very pro-conservative, but it's really just about the voting system, saying they shouldn't have all of the power. It's the 4% of the vote that they had, 56% of the seats, and 100% of the power. I might be getting the first number wrong, but basically it shouldn't be the case that anybody has all of the power. So that needs to be challenged, and we're definitely not anti-Tory, and we do have Conservatives in our alliance to Make Votes Matter. So we've always taken this kind of friendly approach, but then more recently I've started coming around a little bit to some others' way of thinking. So notable other politicians who are saying, well, actually maybe there should be a good cop, bad cop approach. And so it's all great doing that friendly work inside the party, like working with the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform with the Labour Party. But maybe there's also space for people being a bit more challenging and going, why haven't you done this yet? This is against all of your principles. This is about equality. And that's meant to be your kind of key thing. So why aren't you giving everyone equal votes, which means that we can make the country much more equal? So I think MVM's really clear in its friendly approach. My jury's a little bit out with me. I personally don't want to be going shouting at anybody. That's just not my style. But maybe we need the bad cop out there as well.
Yeah, and so I think that's always a question of who does what in any ecosystem, because there are so many different groups as well who are working to campaign for this, and each has to speak with their own kind of authentic voice and speak their particular constituency. As long as we're all pulling on the same rope, you know, as Darren said, I think there are lots of different entry points. Nicole, how do you see that sort of push and pull?
Yeah, although I wouldn't want us to be called the bad cops. In many ways, that's a little bit how we see ourselves. Having said this, we've had some very friendly discussion with Clive Lewis, who's very gratefully took part in one of our Zoom meetings and told us how bad the tribalism is within the Labour Party and what a mountain to climb for us. I mean, the point is, we're all for PR. I mean, we all agree on the principle of it, and that's fine. The question is, I'm a Labour historian. I know a little bit about, you know, how the Labour Party works, and I've been an active member of the Labour Party for many years as well. The thing is, as long as they think they can win under first past the post, they're not going to shift. Lucy Powell, who, you know, written this very, very interesting report, the election review report, chapter 7, the scale of the challenge. Given the long-term trends set out, which are particularly stark in some places, there is no evidence that these trends are abating. This should be of primary concern. You know, they're not going to win. I mean, they need an additional 123 seats, which they admit something no major party has ever done. They call it a mountain to climb. We call it mission impossible. And so when you talk to Labour Party activists that we've met, you know, outside the hustings, including some of the candidates, and we say to them, look, you've no chance. You're not going to regain those Labour voters behind the red wall. They go into the populists. I think there's a certain what's the word, you know, heads in the sand about the effect of populism amongst the working class in this country. And the Labour Party doesn't want to face up to it. Now, Starmer, you know, he's hoping that he's going to regain these votes. I'm telling you, there's no chance. There's no chance. He's got to play the progressive card, which is the majority in this country. Now, the problem is, of course, the trade unions are not going to keep on financing a party that is going to lose again. And that is where I think it's very important that we should try and convince some of the big trade unions that it is to the advantage of their members that Labour goes for PR. Now, how we do this? Well, I'm actually a member of one of the biggest Unison branch in Salford, because I worked in Salford in housing. And I can go there and talk to Rebecca Long-Bailey, and she agrees with me, sort of. You know, and trying to get that branch to agree to PR is probably not going to be that difficult if I really want to try. But, you know, I'm a retired member. I don't attend the meetings really unless I have to. So there's very, you know, working on the trade unions as Compass is just launched today, which I'm not Compass, sorry, Make Vote Matters. I'm very, very pleased to see. But good luck with that. We in Get PR Done, we're kind of establishing a network throughout the country at the moment with people who are going to be out and about, you know, outside conferences, and we're going to canvass them. We're going to lobby them to explain very simply, you're not going to win. A fifth defeat for Labour, that will be the end of Labour in this country. And the trouble is, you see, there is a broader picture here really, which is that social democracy, as Varoufakis said, is dead. Now, how it survived in the UK is because the Brexit party has aligned itself with the Conservative. But, you know, if they break loose, God help us.
Yeah, so I think that relates really strongly to this dilemma of also, I can see people are bringing it up in the questions as well, which is this question of, you know, do you kind of go the kind of harsh, hardball sort of tactical, pragmatic line of saying, look, you just can't win on your own? Is this the approach to Labour? And I see some merit in that because, as you say, Nicole,
Yeah, we've got a phrase amongst us. We love bomb them. The embrace from Rebecca Long Bailey was fantastic.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Or I guess, do you sort of also appeal to the kind of moral or principle argument of saying this is just the right thing to do? And as Kleiner was saying as well, this question about equality. And I wanted to ask Darren as well, specifically in relation to the New Zealand example. There was a hard fought battle in some ways, and some things were necessary to be a bit pragmatic about electoral pacts or alliances in some way. But how do you see the interplay of those two in that specific example? Was it more about appealing to the tactical interests of the party, or do you think that they were won over and persuaded on the kind of ethical, for want of a better word, case for proportional representation?
The New Zealand example, it was sort of imposed on them by the public because they'd gone and reformed the whole society and economy upside down. And then people thought, well, if you've reformed us, we're going to reform you. And one key difference was that the reform movement had the backing of the trade union movement. It was very diverse. It brought in a range of people in a way that I think represented different interests. And then having achieved it, and different demographics as well. I mean, I think one of our big challenges is to build this out amongst a certain style of people in England. Basically, there's a real challenge for us to do that. And in New Zealand, they were able to have a more of a cross-stitch blanket of interest in people that made it more of a community-led effort. I think it's much harder to replicate here. I think it's much harder, particularly after the referendum defeat in 2011. So I think that's why looking at these other models of persuading parties, doing pre-election work, being open with the public, the deliberative democracy, citizens' assemblies type work, as both Kleiner and I have been talking about. I think those things are ways of building up alternative methods of legitimacy. But then having had it imposed, Labour was the party in New Zealand that wanted to make it work. But then as time has gone on, the centre-right parties have wanted to make it work as well. And I think that's where, taking a longer view over several elections, of the last 8 general elections, 4 have resulted in centre-right led governments and 4 centre-left. And I think that's quite an important point, because I know a lot of people are attracted to this topic from a tribal perspective. They've got their side, they want it to win every single time, and I respect that, but it's not what's possible. Sometimes you lose elections, and I think what PR does is maintain a broad range of views, even in defeat. So I think part of the argument to Labour is saying, this is not only a good idea for when you win, because it'll teach you how to work with other interests for longer term policy that beds in after you're gone, so you don't see the massive swings under first past the post. But secondly, it means that when you're out of office, you've still got some influence over things. And I think that's really where some of these arguments need to be taken to Labour about the location of their vote. Far too many people in London vote Labour for the number of seats available. So there's all these wasted Labour votes that don't contribute to anything. And in Scotland, for example, Labour's taking a hammering, but they're still getting just under 20% of the vote, but only getting a single seat. So I think in terms of saying to the Labour Party, look, where are your opportunities? It's not just about when you win. I think it's about when you lose as well. And in that respect, I try and take a several decade view on these sorts of things. But the challenge often is that people who want to talk about it want to talk about what it meant for them at the last election and the next election. And it's hard to get that kind of strategic, longer term focus. But hopefully with New Zealand now, as I say, 4 to each side, so no one can say PR's about biasing one area. Well, I do personally hope next month in October, Jacinda evens up the odds a little for the New Zealand Labour Party.
Makes a lot of sense. Actually, that leads neatly to my final question before we open it up to the members on the call, which is to Kleiner, and that is one about this question of the role of a progressive alliance. So with the necessary focus, I would say, on Labour as being, the party to shift, given that the Tories, despite a few notable exceptions, don't look to be won over by a party, as a party anytime soon. What would you say is the role of a progressive alliance? And do you think people who are pro-PR, and it goes without saying, pro-progressive parties, should be putting their efforts into encouraging more work between the parties, not only just as a means to an end to achieve PR, but also to maybe demonstrate that kind of open collaborative working that, from the other end of the telescope, we want to make the point that if we had PR, then we would have much more collaboration, cooperation. People want to see that that's actually possible. So in the current system, which incentivizes antagonism and binary choices and a lot of infighting and tribalism, Do we want to show that in action and say parties are able to do this, and we need a system that kind of enhances and enables that? So what role for Progressive Alliance in PR is basically my question.
Thank you, Francis. As you know, I have two hats to wear on this answer. So Make Votes Matter is obviously a campaign just for proportional representation for the House of Commons. And so we are not a progressive organisation, we're very much cross-party organisation. And so haven't been able to kind of go anywhere near Progressive Alliance stuff to date. I mean, we do absolutely agree in collaboration and cooperation, hence the alliance we started as one of our first things that we ever did in early 2016. So that's obviously a better way of working, bringing in the wisdom of the many, and that is exactly the point of real democracy, that you bring in everyone's perspectives to come up with better outcomes. So in principle, that's all great. So then switching to my other hat, should I put a hat on?
Yes,
my personal hat. I totally support progressive alliances because I think it's absolutely necessary to, I can't be serious.
So what you're saying is a chicken and egg argument right here. Sorry, but lots of people won't be able to even see this. Kleiner is currently wearing a chicken on her head in order to further the cause of serious progressive politics. Take one for the team there, Kleiner.
Yeah, it's just to indicate this is my personal position, so I'm wearing my personal hat. So I think we need progressive alliances if we're going to get PR, personally. And I think the thing is, once we get Labour on board with PR, which I really believe we can, it's not just hope, I think we really can, and it would be madness if we couldn't, and it's just about doing it as quickly as possible. Once we've got them on board, I can imagine that Make Votes Matter perspective might change, because at that point, you need to get as many pro-PR MPs into Parliament as possible. And so, as we've been talking about, Labour's not going to get into power on their own again. Like, I think that's absolutely right. And so I think if Labour are fully on board, maybe they'll be more open to looking at electoral pacts. We've now got the new Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, who I had a long chat with him last year about this, and he's very much, and he's publicly said that he thinks that the Lib Dems should work with Labour to win the next election. And it's really the only way, and it is going to involve cooperation. And it's not about meaning that the Tories don't get in and Tory voters aren't represented. It's exactly the opposite. It's saying that we bring about this change and then everyone is always fairly represented. There are huge areas where the Conservative voters aren't getting represented, and they should also be represented, as it is the case that normally Green voters aren't represented, etc. So yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Just a chicken hat.
Yeah, for those of you who don't see the visuals, it was a sight to behold.
Hello, this is Grace from the Compass office, interrupting for a moment. I'm lucky enough to come from a large and politically diverse family. We really did have the full political spectrum represented over Christmas dinner, but in spite of our differences, we still actually like each other. I've always known, because of this, that politics should be more about listening and learning from the people we disagree with than shouting at them and fighting with them. And of course, I've definitely known for a long time that it really is bloody complicated. So I was so happy that when one day I discovered Compass, quite by accident, through their brilliant work on the Progressive Alliance in the 2017 general election. Since then, it's been an absolute pleasure to once again be part of a political family where talking to people in different political parties, admitting that you alone don't have all the answers, is not just okay, but actively encouraged. So if you'd like to find out more about Compass, you can visit compassonline.org.uk. And now, back to the conversation.
Grace, I think we have some questions coming up on the chat now. So as is the way often with panels, it'd be best if we could sort of group them maybe possibly by theme. So I think we've got a couple of people asking similar questions. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Let's start. So we've already talked quite a lot about the Labour Party, so we'll just have a couple, there are quite a few people asking about that as well. So I'll bring through a couple. So Colin Miller, and I'll bring in Colin first, and then just as a heads up, I'm going to bring in Mary Southcott, who had a comment rather than a question. So Colin, would you like to ask your question now?
Hi, yes, I've talked to a number of people who support the number of Labour MPs who support the idea of deepening democracy and making it more participative and so on. But one of them said that he opposed PR because it meant that he was scared about losing his connection with his constituency. And that's a theme that comes up with a lot of Labour MPs. And I think it's a genuine one. And I just wanted to know how the panel might respond to that.
Thanks, Colin. Mary, you should also be able to talk now if you wanted to add your comment.
Okay, I'm just saying that it's not likely that Labour will change its mind unless it feels confident about itself, and therefore it's not confident about winning a majority Labour government, but confident that politics will change and that they can influence them, even if they don't have an overall majority government, that they can work with other parties, and the culture of politics will therefore change.
Yeah, that's a great point. Darren, did you want to come in on that?
Well, I totally agree with what Mary just said, and I think that lining up some of these new political realities and giving a sense of confidence is an important thing for any party in any organisation. And I would certainly observe that in this, over a quarter century ago, when New Zealand made the change, it went through the same thing. Two big parties used to dominating the House. Other parties out there getting lots of votes, just like the Greens got 1 million votes for one seat, etc. And it took some time to get people to feel good about the fact that winning an election just meant that you led the government, not that you dominated 100% of it. And so I'm very confident that change comes as a part of the cultural shift, as well as fixing up how the votes are counted. On Colin's point, the two most used PR systems already in the UK that millions of people use already, the MMP system like Germany and New Zealand have, and the STV system. But both of those have strong constituency links to them. And I think that's often a point that's either overlooked or willfully ignored by people who want to keep the status quo. So there'd still be strong local representation. In fact, it would be better because you'd have more people for an area, and it would mean that more citizens would get somebody who they felt more relatable to or could go and see. And I think that's important. I do acknowledge a different argument, which is that a lot of people in politics who don't want to change say they're open and then use this constituency link as though tens of thousands of people in their constituency rely on their every utterance for their work. And I think trying to balance up how we challenge that argument without demeaning the people who make it is quite an important one, because I think for some people it's a little bit of a fig leaf. Having local representation is massively important, but the idea that having one single MP for a geographic area is one of the top concerns of citizens, I think, is overstated. But I think it's a massive concern of politicians, and so that's a reality we have to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think working out what arguments are made in good faith and what aren't is always a difficult thing when coming to these sorts of campaigns, because people may think that they are deeply also wedded to this particular system or idea, but in fact it's getting muddied with other concerns about maybe their own position, not unreasonably. Kleine, anything to add on that question about Labour or the constituency link?
I think I agree with a lot of that, really. I think Darren's covered a lot of what I would have said. Totally agree. Labour need to be encouraged. There's a kind of positive future, not just to say you can't possibly win, so you need to do this, but actually if you do this, then it's going to be better. So, I mean, that would be my take on that one. And in terms of the constituency link, yes, it always comes up. I think it's very much a thing those who don't want reform come up with, and it's just not true. It's one of our myths. When we do the myth busting, and so voting systems like STV do, of course, enhance the constituency link. So if you've got, for example, 5 people to go to represent you about an issue you care about in Parliament, rather than your one, you're far more likely to find at least one person within that set of 5 who is aligned with your views and willing to actually go and champion the view, than if you've just got one who might have the exact opposite view to you. So yeah, PR definitely can strengthen the constituency link, but I don't think it is the most important thing about democracy, for sure.
Great, so I think we can go directly to our next round of questions. Grace, have you got some people
Yes.
waiting?
Next sort of rough theme is around the kind of how we could get PR. So I'm going to bring in David Wright and Alex Cooper.
Yes, I had 2 points that I wanted to make. One was the looking back to the AV referendum and the appalling propaganda that was used to shift public opinion away from it, and then the tragedy of the coalition being perceived as not having succeeded, given that one of the inevitable consequences of PR is going to be coalition government. If the public don't believe it works, then that's another reason why they're not likely to vote for it.
Thanks, David. Alex?
So I'm just noting that there's a lot of talk about taking the debate to political parties and trade unions. And I'm just wondering how we could re-engage the public as well to demand PR. And I think the way we can do that is recognising that there's a lot of disaffection with politics right now, and that, you know, we need an elected second chamber. That's not representative. There's a lot of concern about the centralisation power and the power of party whips, and that prevents our current representatives from representing us. And, you know, we don't have proportional representation. And to me, those things form part of a package that representative democracy needs to evolve. And I think that's a package that you could take to the public and get them to demand PR and better representative democracy. I just wonder what the panel's thoughts were on that.
Yeah, Nicole, do you want to take either or both of those questions?
I'll just take the last point from Alex. I think you're absolutely right. You know, we all forces for PR could get together and try and push for a referendum on it. You know, absolutely. But I still think that we've got to crack the nut, which is the Labour Party. You know, the Progressive Alliance idea is all very well, but you can't, it doesn't work until Labour agrees to it, because it means that on the constituency level, somebody's got to stand down, and the Labour Party constitution stops them from standing down. So, you know, all these things are huge obstacles to a Progressive Alliance. And I mean, I've seen tremendous efforts to try and get this Progressive Alliance at the last 2 elections, and people are banging their heads against the brick wall. You know, it's getting nowhere, and people are getting very frustrated and angry, actually, about Labour's tribalism, just refusing point blank to even talk about it. So the idea of a referendum on PR might be something to think about. You know, we got to keep on trying to convince the good people in Labour that that is their interest.
Aaron, what's your view? Referendum or no referendum?
No, I mean, I think that as we've seen with a lot of the recent referendums, they don't solve the question that they're trying to ask, because they're so blunt, and you end up, you know, relitigating everything. I mean, in a sense, we're relitigating the issue about the voting system, although we're saying for the first time let's put a proper PR option to the public. But it still moves to the point that none of us who support electoral reform thought that we should stop arguing for it after 2011. So I think we need to have more durable solutions on these matters, and I think that's where, you know, manifesto commitments, good arguments within parties, kind of a sense of acceptance, followed by the deliberative process where you are giving it legitimacy. I think that makes a lot of sense. I would also just say on David's point, he's right to mention the 2011 referendum, because, you know, I'm making a non-judgmental point about the Brexit referendum here, but it is a truth that a lot of the people who were on the Leave side were very active in the strategy and the style of the AV referendum. And in fact, they fine-tuned a lot of the things that were used in 2016 and 2011. Now, that'll be back with bells on if we wanted to get on the referendum path. So I think it's better to show the public this can work in as many ways as we can. So that's extending it to local government, second chamber elected by PR, Commons elected by PR, using the process I outlined. And then maybe after 3 general elections, we work out a way of testing how the public like to see both of them in action. Because I'd observed in New Zealand, when they went back to the public after about 5 general elections, the public voted for it in even bigger numbers than they had the first time, having seen it in operation. So I think we have to have pretty smart heads on this, because you can be led up the garden path pretty easily. On the coalition working together point, that's very important, and there's a lot of good material out there that we should promote about how people can be true to their party identity, but also work together on public policy goals. And there's a lot of good stuff that happens on that, and it's happening in the UK. It's just that it doesn't get talked about at Westminster.
Yeah, great point. Anything you want to quickly add, Kleiner, on referendums?
Yeah, if I can. So I think, the AV referendum is a great shame that the option that was put was not a proportional one. So, but again, like as David pointed out, there was horrible propaganda in that, like great big posters saying that a baby in an incubator was going to die if we changed the voting system, and some soldier going to war wasn't going to have the equipment he needed to survive if we changed the voting system. And so I think we need to be really careful about referendums, and as Darren has alluded to as well, like they can be brilliant, but they don't work very well if you don't have the kind of democratic safeguards in place to make sure that you're going to have a sensible, it's not about choosing what the answer to the question is, but if you can't control for the excess influence of money on people's views, where the people don't already have enough information about the issue at hand, it can be really dangerous. And I think where referendums have worked in terms of electoral reform is where there's been some other deliberative process first, like a citizens' assembly. So the example of the citizens' assembly on reproductive rights in Ireland, where they looked at the issue and then recommended outcomes, and then there was a referendum on it. And so the whole process actually helped the public get more informed. So I think if we are to consider a referendum on the voting system again, then we need to think about it carefully, basically. But I don't think it's the ideal route, personally.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that question we were dealing with earlier, which is what kind of politics are we wanting to show, rather than just tell about a different kind of politics. How do we want people to experience politics? And I think the example of Ireland is a really good case in point, where people were able to see on a national stage citizens who were just like them deliberating really depth and in detail for a long time over this really tricky issue, which was very divisive in a lot of parts of Ireland, and then go to a referendum which was actually for it. I think for that previous process, all the better, because people have been seeing this deliberative way of working. And even though referendums can be loud and noisy and kind of binary, it's many different routes to democracy, right? And so you're wanting to think about what kind of culture of democracy we're putting on show. And I think if we're thinking about PR, it's all this question also about collaboration. And as you were saying, Darren, earlier, like leading, but not at the expense of other people, and how to be non-binary and how to have power with rather than power over, and that kind of principle. Grace, I think we have time for one final round of a couple of questions. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got a couple of to squeeze in. So first up, Titus had a question about local government, and then I'm going to bring in Catherine Budget-Meakin, who had a final question. So Titus first.
Is the bill on local government currently going through Parliament, or it's due on reform of local government, an opportunity and obstacle to reform?
Thanks, Titus. And Catherine said, shouldn't PR be part of Build Back Better? So building back better from the coronavirus. Over to you guys.
Great. So we've got a couple of questions on local government and a question on building back better. Kleiner, do you want to have any quick responses to that? We're in the final round, so quick and snappy.
So yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about PR being part of Build Back Better. Of course, it should be. If we're going to improve things in this country, we need real democracy.
Perfect. Nice little soundbite. We can cut and paste that on Twitter. Darren, how about you?
Maybe taking Titus's point on local government, I think that the opportunity in this Parliament is to try and work with some of the new Conservative MPs who seem to be a little less tribal to the party whip. In order to try and see if after the May elections coming up in local government, they see an opportunity for reform there. So I'm not sure the current legislation will be the best vehicle, but I think coming up, that's a real issue. And of course, in Wales, there's a new regime around local government that we should pursue as reformers there too. So, building up these nice examples from the nations who are ahead of Westminster on these matters to bring democracy alive for people.
And just the experiences of it in other places, I think, is so crucial to showing rather than telling. Once again, demonstrating that it can work. I think that convinces a lot of different people. Nicole, any kind of thoughts on either Build Back Better or the question of local government?
Well, not really. I think, you know, I think we're going all over the place here now. As far as I'm concerned, we've got to get the Labour Party to adopt PR. That's a priority. Everything else falls from that, really. I'd just like to mention one little thing, though, that we keep forgetting. The Brexit Party is in favour of PR. Don't forget that. And the Brexit Party probably controls about the 3 or 4 million voters behind the red wall that Labour wants to regain. Fat chance of that. So, you know, a referendum, you don't think it's a good idea, it is dangerous? Maybe. But I'll tell you what, if you get the Brexit Party behind it, we might get it. And I'm a left-winger.
Yeah, this question about which kind of coalitions you need to build to
well, I don't care what coalition we have, as long as we get it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know the majority of people in this country are not conservative, and they're not even Brexiteers.
Yeah, I think we need everybody who wants proportional representation pushing together to make it happen, and that's why we actually have the Brexit Party in the Make Votes Matter alliance. This isn't just a left-wing topic.
No, but we
really need to all work together.
We don't care. We don't care.
Equal votes.
Trouble is, they control these Labour votes behind the red wall. That's what you've got to understand. You know, the moment Farage decides to stand his men again, the 600 candidates, Johnson's gone.
Yeah, and so these questions of how we work across the spectrum with different people, I think is a really key one. Like lots of different points of the coalface, and trying to be, you know, hammering where we can, and that's crucially a crucial approach. So that just remains me today. Thank you very much to Kleine, Darren, and Nicole for your time, and for all the members who joined us tonight. Just to say, the support of our members, like you guys on the call, is really what makes it possible to hold these conversations and do all of our thinking, policy, and campaigning, including our work for PR. So if you like what you heard today and want to be part of Compass, please visit us at compassonline.org.uk/podcast, and you can hear when this goes live on Friday. You can tweet us also at Compass, at Compass Office. And if you enjoyed what you heard, do give us a rating, because it'll help us reach more listeners in the future. Next week, we're going to be joined by Alex Fox, Madeline Bunting, and Joe Lippler to discuss the really pressing and fundamental question of care nowadays. So we'll be coming up that question of care from a lot of different angles. Obviously, this has been a subject which has been in the foremost of our minds throughout the past few months. So we'll be thinking about care in politics, care in different parts of society, and how we value and demonstrate the value of care in all of our political work. So as ever, you can sign up on our website, or you should also get an email about it if you are a member. Once again, many thanks. You can also obviously join the great work that Get PR done, Make Votes Matter and Electoral Reform Society do, and of course Compass is part of that alliance as well. So please do continue to do your campaigning, wearing your silly hats, writing to your MPs, badgering people outside party conferences, whatever helps and whatever makes a difference. So please continue to go and do that, with or without Kleine's chicken hat. Thanks everybody, and good night.
If you like what you heard today and want to be part of building a much more equal, democratic and sustainable future, then visit us at compassonline.org.uk/podcast. Plus, you'll be able to join us live on future calls like this one. You can tweet at us at Compass Office or email me at francis@compassonline.org.uk. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give us a rating. It will help us reach more listeners in the future. After all, it's only fair they know it's bloody complicated too.